was born in Milford, Delaware, my mother's hometown, in May 15, 1947. My mother, who was from Milford, she was raised by her grandmother, Gertrude Russell. She was my great-grandmother. She brought me into the world, and her home was on Church Avenue in Milford. It's now torn down, but she brought many whites and blacks into the world in the Milford, Delaware area. My grandfather also raised her, and his name was George Sorden, who later resided in Dover, Delaware. And he married Myrtle, and they had a child. And then on my father's side, my grandparents were George Parker and Hilda Lockwood Parker from Lewis, Delaware. She was a slave on a ship off of Lewis, and that she cooked on this particular ship. But they remembered her as smoking a pipe and walking barefoot around Lewis. And my grandmother had some little notes that she wrote about her grandmother. But my father actually did see her, and she was over 100 years old when she passed. George Parker from Lewis worked at the corner company, which was just torn down a couple of years ago in Hope Beach. And every one of us, each generation, had an opportunity when we were in college or high school to work at the corner cupboard. So it was kind of like a family thing, the Gundry family. And my grandmother Hilda was a professional culinary arts cook, if you will. She cooked in what they call the Lou Inairs restaurant in Lewis for a long time. She cooked in different restaurants in Rehoboth. And then one day some gentleman liked her food and taste of her food, called her out of the kitchen. This is the story she told us. And she wound up working at Duquesne University. My father was kind of like the oldest, so he oversaw his younger brothers and sisters while she would go there and work in the wintertime. And that's how she made money to help send him and his cousin, I call him Uncle Cliff, who's now deceased. They sent them to Delaware State College, the high school first and then the college. Lewis was unique because the African American school was a brick building. It's still there today, and it's part of the Cape Henn Local School District. And now University of Delaware uses it for an adult ed program for seniors. That was the school. It was once called the junior high school. My father went there, and several of my classmates at Jason went there. And it was, of course, in the all-black community. And they talked about the teachers they had were very tough teachers who didn't play, and when they went to Jason, they were well prepared. And we all were, that's another story, but we all were bussed in from these little wooden schools.
Okay.
But the Lewis school was brick, and we wondered how they did that. People were hard-working people, and education was a top priority in all of the African American communities at that time. Education only went in Susquehanna to grade 8. There was no high school there, so they had to either go to Delaware State University High School for the colored or Howard High School. Daddy went to Delaware State High School, then later Delaware State College. He talked about the little red building, the T building, and how the mice would come up into the T building. It would be real cold, like nights where you used to getting warm. He said they had blankets and they'd wrap up real tight, and they'd have to walk to the classes. There weren't many buildings on the campus. Delaware Hall, of course, was there at the time. And he said the teachers were very tough, and they studied all night long. He said they, take candles sometimes just to study to make sure they got their work done, because the teachers were very tough on them. And of course, he did very well in high school, and when he went to Delaware State College, he did very well as well. He had 2 bachelors. First, the degree was in elementary ed, and then he was drafted into military. He fought in World War II. And he came back from World War II, and that's when he majored in science education. That's when he got his degree, so he was eligible then to be a teacher, and went on to pursue a teaching position. Before Delaware State Education Association, DSEA, each county had their education associations, and my father was the first African American ever elected as president of that Sussex County Education Association, pre-DSEA. And then, of course, later on, he became very active with DSEA. My mother went to Benjamin Banneker Elementary School in Milford, which still the school there named Benjamin Banneker Elementary School. Later, she went to Howard High School. And her experience was she went to Howard High and had to stay in a boarding house in order to go to high school. She and her sister at that time. And of course, when she finished Howard High, she and Daddy got connected after World War II, and then yours truly became part of that connection. And then the story goes on to more things. When they first got married, they stayed in my great-grandmother's home, the midwife, in Milford, until Daddy was able to get a place in Lewis. And then they found a place in Lewis, his hometown. But then that became too small, and he was looking for his job, and he was trying to get a home in Lewis. However, because of his race, he was not able to get a loan. He went to Milton looking for a place, and there was a white gentleman, I've heard this story over and over as a little girl, who knew he fought in the war and said, let's give you a chance. And he helped my father get a loan from a bank in Milton. And Daddy was able to secure the land we all have now in Milton, which is very good land. And he was able to get the home place, and later on he gave me my piece of land, and my brother, he has his piece of land. That's what happened in Sussex County. You get land and you pass it on down to your children. But yeah, she really enjoyed the Howard High experience, but it was a way of life. They knew they had no other choice, and they didn't really look at it as a negative thing until everything started being looked at. The conscience of our nation was looking at it, then it became something that we all started talking about as well. Everything was segregated in their time. I mean, I heard a lot about the segregation as a little girl growing up, but there was no hatred or animosity, because that's how it was. People just kind of lived their own lifestyle. The people in Lewis all lived in what is now a very high-end area on Park Avenue. Even in Lewis, there's called Ship Carpenter Square. That used to be an all African American community. And our little church, my home church, St. George AME Church, still is there. And it's known as the historical St. George's AME. And I could get into that too, because the original one was a corn crib that was given by a white lady in Lewis down on Pilot Town Road, which the graveyard is still there with some names. Parker, my family name is on one of the gravestones up there. And then later that burned down, and then they went on and built this church. Many of the African Americans who worked in Rehoboth during that period of time in the 50s and the 60s came from the southern states. They were more like migrant. They migrated in the summertime to the corner cupboard. Whereas my grandfather worked there year round for the people. They had a place called the Winters Inn as well. And he worked there for them all year long because he lived in Lewis. But most of the other help came up in the summer at the corner cupboard from Florida and North Carolina, places like that. There was never anyone but African Americans working in any restaurant or home or hotel in Rehoboth. You never saw Caucasians working in any of those places. That's how it was when I worked. Now, when I worked at the original Henlopen Hotel, which was washed out in the storm of '62. We were only allowed to sit on one part of the boardwalk, and it was called the Crow's Nest. That was before the integration started. Right after integration, which I was involved as a high school student in 1965-66, they opened up the restaurants on Rehoboth Avenue. I think I was one of the first people to go down and get a hamburger in one of the restaurants called Louis. It's still there today. I don't know if the same people own it or not. But that was the beginning of the integration right after the movement, if you will. Ku Klux Klan burned the cross in our yard, and I was 12 years old. My brother was like 4 years younger than I was. But it was dark, and I happened to sit down in the living room, and we always had our curtains up or what have you. And next thing I know, this huge burning thing was in the back. And I screamed, and my brother looked, he screamed, and we were little kids. I mean, that was traumatic to me. And then my father came running, and mom came running, they saw it, and all of us, and then they got the police there, and friends from Lewis were called, and they all came over. It was very traumatic. And then my father was telling us that, this happened because there are some evil people out there. But what was going on, they were instrumental in trying to he worked a lot with the whites to try to make sure integration in the schools in Sussex would be a smooth operation and not a lot of problems. And they would come to our house, and of course some people, I guess, saw that, didn't like it. And they were members of the NAACP, which was something my grandmother taught everybody. That's what you do back then. be a member of the NAACP, and their mail was gone through. It was very ugly at that period of time. Police would have to watch her home and all after that incident occurred. But I do know my mother was in the paper. She was quoted. My mother didn't take too much from people. And she did later years. Some of those same people who were involved, Mom said, came and actually said they were sorry that they had done that and they were involved in it when things were in integration. So. St. George's AME Church is still a little icon in Lewis, Delaware. It was the church. It was the social place for the African American families. I mean, everybody went there from every little home. And that, well, around the street was St. Paul, so there were two African American churches, AME and the United Methodists. And all the community would go to either one of the churches. I grew up in the St. George AME Church. And my grandmother was a very staunch member there. She was a historian there and a leader, per se. Her grandmother, who was a slave, Millie Lockwood, she, and the missionary, Millie Lockwood missionary still exists today, was very active. She was part of why my grandmother was active in that particular church, because her people were very religious and believed that you have to go to church. In fact, that's what black people did more than anything. But it was an entire community. That community no longer exists as it did. You have maybe, you're good to see 5 or 6 families of color there in that area. But that church was the place where everyone went. And they promoted education to all of us, our Sunday school teachers and all. We heard education from the time we woke up out of bed till the time we went to sleep. You just don't go anywhere in life unless you get your education. (196C). I'll never forget that school. That's the school that made me, I'm telling you. It was a 2-room duplex school, which was for all the little colored children, as they said, or the Negro children at that time. Sussex County had them in every little, the entire state had them. Every little town had one school, and there were little wooden schools, except for Lewis had the brick school, which I told you about earlier. And 2 rooms and 6 grades. I went grades 1 through 3, Anna Henry, and 4, 5, 6 with Viola Piper. Both teachers were awesome. I attribute that beginning to why I did well at William C. Jason Comprehensive High School, our segregated high school. And then each grade had set in a row. First grade, 1 row, second grade, a row, third grade, as I recall the rows. And then when the teacher became busy, or she had to go cook the lunch, which was in another little kitchen area off from the building. But before me, there was a lot of conversation about 196C. Some of the students had to go in and do the pot-belly stove. We were a little more modern. We didn't have that part, but the teacher still had to stop at a certain point before lunchtime and go and cook lunch until they were able to secure someone to come and cook later on. By my 6th grade year, they were able to get a community aide to come in and be the little cook, and we had cheese sandwiches and soup. That was our hot lunch program. In 4, 5, and 6, I can remember, then some of us would be able to help our classmates. It was kind of like the little help peer teaching, or the peer students helping, which later on when I became a teacher, I'm thinking, I did this when I was in 196C. So the 196C experience was one where we got hand-me-down books, torn up books from the Milton White School, as they called it then, which still is in the town in the Cape Henlopen School District. Then later years, that particular school, many other children came and they had to spread out and use Bethel AME Church basement and another lodge home down the street until integration occurred in 1967, when all the integration was to occur. That's when everyone began to go to their separate town district schools. Each town had their own district. And then around 1969, Lewis, Milton, and Rehoboth became Cape Henlopen School District. My entire education, even in the 2-room school, I can say I enjoyed school. I loved school. I loved school. I loved reading and just doing everything and socializing. I was always a social person always. But the William C. Jason Comprehensive High School experience is one you can't explain. We are still family. We all came from every town in Sussex. We were bussed into that one building, which was a beautiful, modern school. We had all modern equipment, books, everything. And the experience was we had highly educated teachers. They held master's degrees, and we were given a top grade education in that segregated high school. Unfortunately, we just lost one of our best math teachers, Mr. William Davis, and he was a top-notch math teacher. He explained to everyone in a public forum at Del Tech that the William C. Jason students scored very high this one particular year in math in the whole state of Delaware, but no one recognized that. And he made sure he told that story to a group of, in an integrated setting later. Elizabeth C. Dix and her husband, Mr. William C. Dix, was principal. Mrs. Dix was our English teacher. The woman was awesome. You had better have the right grammar, and you better speak properly when you spoke to her in the hallways. It was fantastic. They made us do the right thing. We had to do it. We knew we were loved, but we also knew we better respect the people in charge. And I kind of was in everything. Cheerleader, I was in the band. Athletics, we weren't competing with any other schools. We just did intramural type sports. The boys had a football team, basketball team. They traveled, but we had to play teams in Maryland, all African American schools. We weren't at that time allowed to play any of the white schools at the time. But we had a Spanish club. We had a home economics club. Any club in the world you wanted, we had it. And I was one of those people pretty much in almost all of those clubs. And at one point, Mr. Donald McDonald Coker, who later went to Leg Hall to write bills, he was my history teacher. And he inspired me by sending me to Girls State. I was one of the first African Americans from Sussex to go to Girls State to run the government and what have you. That's kind of stuck in my mind, and later on it went into my life. The parents were very involved. PTA, very strong. Our grandparents were even involved. My grandmother was very active with the William C. Jason PTA. It didn't stop at mom and dad. It went into the community. The preachers were involved. And you don't see a lot of that anymore either for anybody. The churches were very active in doing things for Jason High School. And when we went on trips, everybody bought little tickets and donated money, and they donated whatever they could. It was just a family affair. Even in the two-room school, and I'm a high proponent that you can't just teach out of a book and now on the computer, even though they can see the picture on the screen. There's nothing like going to Washington, D.C., a 2-hour drive, to actually walk into the Smithsonian, Natural History Museum, American History Museum, all those museums. And sometimes the students don't get there, and some of the students who really need to go feel and see and touch, they never get that experience. Whereas in the two-room poor school, we did that. Our PTA would raise funds. They raised the money and they took us to Washington, D.C. My classroom was run sort of like what I was taught at Jason. And I have many students, integrated students now, who tell me I need to go back and teach now in today's schools. And I said, no way, it wouldn't work today. But the teachers were awesome. I didn't major in education, but I wound up teaching, which I said I wasn't going to do. Yes. But in either way, I was working with kids. I wanted to work with young people, so that was the goal. And then I later went to the university. All my education was in Delaware, University of Delaware, and received my master's. Because I was a sociology major and did not go into social work because you had to go get your master's, and I didn't get to do that. But I said I'm going to just apply for jobs. I didn't care what it was. So I applied to education jobs and social work jobs. And I said, the first group to call me, I'm going. Well, the Cape and Little School District at the time called me. I went, did an interview, one-on-one interview, and they hired me right away. Then a week later, social work people called me, but I already had taken the Cape job. I just wanted a job at that time. So I worked for the Cape and Little School District, one of the first teachers hired in that district in 1970. Was when my career began in Cape. That's when it really was Cape and local. And then from there, I taught all grades, K through 12, and I became a principal, K through 12, certified. And I did high school for about 8 or 9 years at the Cape and local high school. And then I wound up district level administrator. I did HR, and I did mentoring programs and community service programs. And when I retired, I had done it all. I even did a year in the Capital School District in the middle of that, all of that, as a principal at Booker T. Washington, which was a great experience for me. So I've kind of like done the whole gamut to go from segregated system and wind up teaching in the integrated system was kind of like something I'll hold dear to my heart. It was a great experience, even though segregation wasn't the prettiest thing or the greatest thing in the world. But being in the integrated system, to see how we finally have learned that people can live together if they work together and understand each other, that has been a really wonderful part of my life. Something I hope that we can do work better more on now, problems we have in today's society. Basically, it started in high school. Mr. Coker started me thinking about it. I didn't realize until an adult. But I began to look around, and I was seeing that representation for all the people, diversity wasn't happening. Here I am, a teacher, telling all of my students of all races, you have to be involved, you have to get out there. Then I'm looking around and saying, nobody's representing all the people here. And fortunately, I always went to a lot of organizations and participated with all people. So I ran into people who said, Stell, you need to run for office. And I said, oh, I haven't thought of that. So I thought about it, then an opportunity came, and I ran against Mr. Thurman Adams. Well, people thought I was crazy. Why are you going to run against Thurman Adams? And Mr. Adams was in office when I was in high school, so, it was like really different. I said, well, they say you have a right to run for office, so I think I'm going to try this. Well, it caused a little bit of controversy, but I did run. Of course, I didn't win or with the icon like Mr. Adams, but it was my first experience. And also, I'm hoping to show all kids, all races, that women and African Americans and whoever can run for an office. You win some, you lose some, but you don't give up. And later on, I ran against our present governor for state treasurer. And so far, I've been the only African American from Sussex County of color to run for a Senate position or a state position. And I wasn't out trying to make history, but I looked at somebody reminded me of that, and I'm thinking, really? But at least I think maybe some young women of all races will look at it and say, well, maybe I'll try that. You just kind of like get out there and get involved, but nothing will happen unless all people get involved. That's basically the message I wanted to send. And now I am on the Milton Town Council. That kind of happened. The mayor, she became mayor and approached me about becoming a member of her council as an appointee. So I did it, and if you don't want it, you don't have to run for it. So I liked it, and I thought I'd better stay here a few more minutes since I am from Milton. So I ran and I won that position, which I now hold for another couple of years. The positive piece of it is growth. I'm a progressive person. I don't like to see things stay still and not move. And we've got growth. We didn't have a grocery store. I can walk to the grocery store. That's beautiful. We're getting a brand new senior citizen center, which is going to be nice. Our town is getting more little businesses, which will draw people in and make the town a little livelier, which it used to be always a very active little town. It's been really great to see people coming in. However, the new developments that are coming in, you don't have a lot of diversity in the developments. And it's kind of like a resegregation to me, because we're not seeing people mingling as much of the different races as you did, because we all lived in a town and neighborhoods. I lived in an integrated neighborhood most of my life, so it didn't bother me. But when you're seeing separate little groups over here and groups over there, and the people aren't mingling a lot, that's resegregation. I don't think we need to get back into that. and looking at what's happening in Ferguson and other places in the country of the African American children and the males. We've got to pay attention to all this, and it hasn't ever gone away. But do we have to really go back and get worse than we were in the 50s? No, we don't. And that's kind of what I'm going to see what I can do to make sure that never happens. As a teacher being hired in 1970 for Cape Henlopen, I was a second grade teacher. I started out real elementary. And the parents at first, I could tell they were like, who's this woman coming in here going to teach my child? But then after maybe the first month or two, their children were going home and they were taking home academic, high achieving kinds of things, because that's kind of where I was coming from, and things kind of smoothed out. Then over the years, everybody saw, well, this lady has her thing, she's on top of it. And the problems were, I didn't have a lot of racial stuff. I can actually sit here and say there was more of it in the pre-integration than I ever saw when I was in the Cape Henlopen School District. My students, my white students today, and call any one of them or go on Facebook and just call my name, and I can guarantee they'll say, I love her, she loved us, the majority of them. Now, I got on some of them pretty hard no matter what they looked like, if they weren't doing the right thing. But the parents were kind of like had to buy in the beginning. I proved that I'm just a human being trying to teach your child. I don't think people looked at too much, she's black or whatever. But there was that subtle thing still there, because Sussex County being the last county to want to get rid of slaves, they're still there now, even with all this new 2014. You can still feel there's something there that has been taught for 300 or 400 years in some areas, in some families or what have you. But overall, I had a very good experience with my students and their parents as time went on. Cape Henlopen, basically, African American athletes who also were academic stars were part of bringing that district on the map, because the athletics, I don't care where you were in athletics, kind of football teams and basketball teams, they bring the school on, put the school on the map. And several African Americans who went on to be educated and doing very well out there in the world put Cape on the map. And I don't think that today, and we had about, I think 36% African American students at that time. But today, you have a dwindling, there aren't that many, I don't know the percentage, but it's a very low percentage of students, but even lower than with the professional staff, which bothers me, because I always was out there fighting to get more teachers in, because our society has to see, our white students as well as the blacks have to see that all kinds of people are out there in the world, can teach you and help you or what have you. And I don't think a lot of our students now are seeing that, even with the few teachers we had at the time that I was trying to get more, but now there are far less, particularly at the high school level. And I think I've heard a lot of some of the teachers saying there's a racial undertone here again, and with the national thing like it is now, it's gotten a little worse. And it's not good for the students, it's not good for the professional staff or anyone, for students just to not eat. Some students of color will never see a teacher of color. They may not ever see a teacher of color. That is not good in anybody's school district. Then when you go to Washington, D.C., New York, or whatever, you see all these diverse groups, even coming to Wilmington, people, diverse groups, and you're in little Sussex County and you don't see people who are professionals who can't teach or go to the lawyers or anything. That is not good. That part I see Sussex is not really progressive in, and they do need to do better there. So maybe I can say something, but I'm just one voice. But we're not looking good in race and integration in Sussex anymore for things that really matter, in my opinion. Whereas during the time in the 70s and 80s, the students got along real well and the parents kind of got along. With my son, who was a football star, all-star for Stell, he stayed at homes of his white friends. They came over to our home. It was, the integration piece worked, I say. But now it's becoming to be, here we are separating everything again. They say history repeats itself, but I said, oh God, please don't let it go back to the 50s. because that will not work with our country. We need to keep our country strong. All of our children need to get along, learn together, love each other. And it's these adults who are separating things. Leave the kids alone, let them learn and love and grow up and be Americans in peace so that we'll have a strong country. And we can't do that with all this separation. There are no bad children. And once you take every child and get them on an experience, some of the ones they call bad are afraid because they've never done or seen such another piece of the world. And we have to do more of exposing our children to all of the things, not just one little narrow bubble. I know as a principal and a teacher, if I saw a child ever sitting not eating in a cafeteria, and many of them have pride, kids who don't have money or what have you, I would go say, why aren't you eating? Oh, I don't feel like. I said, go get yourself something. I picked up the tab many times. But I don't know if people even pay attention anymore. Or it's always, it costs too much, or no, that's not my job. You can't live like that and educate young people to prepare them for the real world. We have to all be caring, affirm, caring, and understanding, but show them a lot of love. Show them a lot of love, get anything out of them you want. They did it to me, and that's what I try to do to my students.